Okay, welcome again to the Information Forum for the BLM Southern Nevada District Office on mapping restoration opportunities. Thank you for joining us. My name is Marcia Rickey, and I'm going to get us started tonight. Note, please join this meeting using computer audio. So I will go over in just a second the sort of forum ABCs that we will use for this meeting. Great, thank you. So again, like I said, please join this forum using computer audio. The microphone mute and unmute is going to be controlled by our Zoom technician, and that is Chelsea Ontiveros. We are going to have a question and answer period. And during that time, please use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We are also going to have a public input session. And during that time, use the raise hand icon also in your Zoom screen at the bottom. If you have urgent technical questions or you can't get something to work, you can use the chat icon to chat directly with our Zoom technician, Chelsea Ontiveros. And if the chat function is not working, you can call her directly at 775-338-6855, and you can speak to her directly. Please note that this meeting is being recorded. A video of this meeting is going to be posted on the BLM Nevada YouTube website. To enable the use of closed captions, please click the live transcript button in your Zoom toolbar and then click show subtitles. I'm now going to go over the agenda that we are going to use with this forum. So first, we are going to have introductions of the BLM team and the EMPSI team. And then we are going to talk about why is the BLM mapping restoration opportunities. How has the BLM mapped the restoration opportunities so far, and what are we going to do next? We'll go over some frequently asked questions. We'll talk about how you, members of the public, can get involved. We'll go over what are the BLM's next steps. Then we'll have a question and answer period, and then we'll have a public input period. In addition to the public input period tonight, we also have a website where you can submit written comments. Those written comments are due on September 16th of this year. And on later slides, we'll show you the URL for that website where you can submit your comments. So also tonight, we are going to conclude this meeting at 8 p.m. I'm going to now turn the meeting over to Steve Leslie, who is the Assistant Field Manager for the Las Vegas Field Office, and he is going to give his open remarks. Steve?
Thanks, Marcia. Hi, everyone. As Marcia said, my name is Steve Leslie, and I'm the Las Vegas Assistant Field Manager for the Bureau of Land Management's Southern Nevada District. Welcome to this public information forum for mapping restoration opportunities for Southern Nevada District restoration projects. Today, we will provide a brief presentation on the map we have developed and how we plan to use that map and our next steps. Restoration is critical to ensuring the protection of the various and significant resources and habitat on the public lands within the Southern Nevada District. I really appreciate everyone's interest and participation in tonight's forum, and we look forward to hearing from all of you with your questions and comments. The other managers listed on this slide in the Southern Nevada District also appreciate your interest. With that, I will now turn this presentation over to the Bureau of Land Management Project Manager, Boris Poff. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Steve. With me tonight is a team of BLM specialists and EMPSI, a consultant helping us with this project. On our BLM team, we have myself, Boris Poff, as well as JJ Smith, Lara Cobelt, Adam Johnson, Lee Setters, Ernie Johnson, Evan Myers, and Kirsten Cannon. On the EMPSI team, we have Marcia Rickey, Rob Levy, Ali Yanitsky, and Chelsea Ontiveros. So why are we, the BLM, doing this? Well, we believe that mapping restoration opportunities will help us to ensure that we, as a land management agency, will be successful in identifying areas that are important for conservation. Also, we're looking for areas that have existing disturbances. Otherwise, they wouldn't need restoration. And lastly, we want to make sure that we identify areas for restorations that don't have undesirable areas or are proposed for uses that would prevent restoration. Our restoration opportunities maps identifies areas where restoration can maximize conservation outcomes and optimize the use of funds. To start out mapping restoration opportunities, we held an agency stakeholder meeting on March 3rd, and we held a public meeting on March 9th. We accepted public input from February 16th through April 8th. Through this public input period, we received several substantive and helpful comments. The Nature Conservancy and Desert Tortoise Council submitted comments on groundwater dependent ecosystem and desert tortoise habitat connectivity. So how will the BLM identify and map the restoration opportunities? To do this, we identified and mapped areas with high through low potential for restoration. And we made our map using our extensive and comprehensive set of BLM GIS data, as well as the experience of our BLM staff in Southern Nevada. We collectively probably have over a century of experience. Public input submitted during March and April around our first meeting and input period. And of course, we will gladly look at any further data submitted from government, tribes, stakeholders, and you, the public. The map here shows the study area, which includes BLM administered lands in Southern Nevada district, except for the Dry Lakes and Amargosa Valley energy zones, the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act disposal boundary. If you're from this area, you'll know that's the Snipplemer boundary, and the Nellis test and training range. So how did we make the restoration opportunities map? We grouped data into resources, disturbances, and areas undesirable for restoration. Data sets within these groups were weighted according to how important the resources are and how important the disturbances are. Then these three heat maps were added using the ArcGIS tool raster calculator to form our restoration opportunities heat map. I'm going to turn it over now to JJ Smith, who will describe this process in more detail. JJ.
Okay, thanks, Boris. So we looked at resources as being important plants or wildlife, excuse me, or their habitat. So for example, obviously in Southern Nevada, the desert tortoise is an important resource. Some of the data sources we use to map resources include things like observations, also modeling of threatened and endangered species habitat, and BLM sensitive plant and wildlife species occurrences. Other important plant habitats we included like Joshua Tree areas, large mammal corridors, specifically bighorn sheep winter range, and related features such as important desert tortoise habitat corridors. Each of these resources was then weighted on a scale of 0 to 100. Then all the data sources were combined into a resources heat map, which you see here. The cooler colors here, the blues, represent areas with fewer resources or with a lower combined value of resources. And then the warmer colors, the yellows, the oranges, the reds, those represent the occurrences of relatively more resources or a higher combined importance or value of those resources present. For disturbances, we did a similar exercise here. The map disturbances that we had data for or that we developed data for this project included recently burned areas, those that have burned within the past 8 years or so, areas with Sahara mustard, which is a particularly aggressive invasive species, areas where we had predicted cover of invasive annual grasses of 30% or more, areas within 200 feet of a major road, areas with just an overall high density of roads, areas where the vegetation condition is substantially different from historical reference vegetation conditions and formerly used defense sites. So those were the disturbances. And just like the resources heat map, each disturbance type was weighted on a scale of 0 to 100. Then all the disturbance types were combined into a disturbance heat map that you see here. Again, the lower disturbance values are represented by cooler colors. Areas with higher, relatively higher disturbance are shown with the warmer colors. And then that third component that Boris mentioned here are these areas that are undesirable for restoration. And these areas just don't make a lot of sense to restore because they're already prioritized for another land use other than conservation. And these encompass things like highways, major roads, railroads, intensive recreation areas like off-highway vehicle open areas, renewable energy application or project areas, communication sites, substations, and then those areas within the Southern Nevada Public Land Management Act boundary, again, that Boris mentioned, those might eventually be sold or developed, so they're not suitable for restoration. These areas that are undesirable for restoration were weighted differently. They were weighted at -100. So essentially they're blacked out as no-go areas for restoration, at least for this, this project. So the resulting heat map here is just, it's just two colors, yellow showing the areas where restoration could be desirable, and then those purple areas where restoration wouldn't be very worthwhile. The final step then was to take the heat maps for the resources, the disturbances, and in these undesirable areas, and combine them into what we're calling the restoration opportunities heat map, which is here you can see the warmer colors in yellows. These represent areas that appear to have the greatest opportunities for giving us the most bang for our restoration buck. And the GIS data that we included for all these, the resources and disturbances, can be found here at this website. And you'll see this URL again at the end of the presentation, so you don't need to worry about writing it down. This site also has an interactive map that you can look at if you don't have a way of working with GIS data. Okay, so let's zoom in a little and take a look at the heat map approach and how this could help with project planning. This is the Benelli Peak fire, and it's an example we discussed at our meeting in March. And it's an example of protecting resources through targeted restoration treatments. So we'll just look at this example again. Just a little background. Most areas of Southern Nevada are dominated by creosote bush, white burr sage, Joshua tree, and some other upland Mojave desert plant species. And in the past, large wildfires were relatively rare in this landscape. But over the past few decades, due in large part to the spread of invasive grasses, these large wildfires have become much more frequent. Native plants in areas that burn in a wildfire once generally have some ability to recover on their own, and they're good. These areas are good candidates for restoration. But areas that burn multiple times tend to become dominated increasingly by invasive grasses, and in these areas, we may have limited opportunities for restoration. So for this Benelli Peak area, we designed a project that has largely been converted to an invasive grassland because of multiple fires. So we focused on targeting restoration along the perimeter of the burned area to try to contain it. And since we're pretty familiar with this area on the ground, we used it to compare to our heat map exercise that we did. And here's kind of what we found when we looked at that. So if we look at the resources present in this area, we see that we have some high and medium desert tortoise connectivity areas running through the central part of the fire perimeter. And then there are a couple of springs in there, and there are some BLM sensitive plant species occurrences. And in this case, it's called the Mokiak milk vetch. So those are the primary resources we saw. For disturbances, well, obviously there's the fire, is the Benelli Peak fire, and that occurred in 2019. And we rated these more recent fires as having higher opportunities for restoration because post-fire restoration activities tend to be most effective when done shortly after a fire. But this area was also burned. It also burned in 1994 and again in 2005. So we're more likely to have permanent damage to vegetation in this scenario and to the seed banks, and then an increasing dominance by invasive grasses. This type of situation with these multiple burns is fairly well represented by what's called a vegetation condition class. And this is a model of how different the vegetation type is from past reference conditions. And this layer, this vegetation condition class, was generated with a land fire model. And that model was based on 2016 satellite imagery. And it shows, you can see here, sort of the southern half of the Benelli Peak fire area having a moderate to high departure from historic conditions. And then the northern portion has a less altered state in green. Now, the Benelli Peak fire occurred after this land fire model data was incorporated here. So it's there's a good chance that a lot of this green area has been expanded or has been changed to orange because of more damage by the Benelli Peak fire. Okay, let's look at how the restoration heat map that we're working on represents this area. So basically, you can see the model depicts the area where the fires occurred and categorizes it as having a high restoration opportunity because of the presence of the disturbances. But the high level of disturbance does sort of overwhelm the geographically smaller, but nevertheless important resources like the springs and the small patches of rare plants. So we're going to need to tweak the values of those resources so that they show up as a brighter occurrence, or depict them in some other way so that they aren't represented because of their small size. The thing the heat map picks out very well are these apparent restoration opportunities north of the fire perimeter. And having been there on the ground and already designed a project there, we know that these areas are associated with washes, and they have a low to moderate invasive grass population where, some relatively small investments in weed treatments may reduce the fuel loading enough to stop or slow a future fire from spreading north, which is typically downwind during fire season. So we'll be doing more of these zoomed in analyses for areas that we haven't spent a lot of time on the ground to see what kind of patterns pop out at us and which resource values or disturbances need to be adjusted so that we can get a better accurate representation of what's out there. And with that, I will hand it back to Boris.
All right, thanks, JJ. One of the questions asked several times was how the BLM will use the study. Our answer is that we will use the study to find the best location to focus restoration efforts. We are trying to determine where the highest value for resources are, where the disturbances are, and where these two intersect. Again, the BLM will use this study to identify restoration opportunities, as JJ just explained. Another question we received was, does the study amend or supplement current resource management plans? And the answer is that, while the study does not amend or supplement current resource management plans, we may use the results of the study in future planning efforts. More questions and answers are available at our website listed here. And we'll answer your questions during our question and answer period as well. If you would like to get involved, you may provide input verbally tonight. You may also submit a written input on our website listed here. And if you have trouble with submitting comments, please email us at this email listed here as well. Remember, public input is due September 16th of this year, just a little over 2 weeks from now. Public input that would be most helpful to the BLM is on-the-ground information about important conservation areas or about disturbed areas, either of which could be opportunities for restoration. The following types of information will be most helpful for our study. Input on any areas on restoration opportunity maps that don't match your on-the-ground experience, or any areas that would be good for restoration but are not shown as such on our map. Also, input on which species or habitats should be ranked high, medium, or low opportunity for restoration. And GIS data, Google Earth data, or spreadsheets with coordinates of rare habitats, threatened, endangered, or candidate species, or BLM sensitive species, or disturbed areas that could benefit from restoration would be the most helpful information. For example, let's say you have noticed the area around your favorite mountain biking trail has become filled with annual grasses. You could report to us that trail's location and the fact that it's filled with annual grasses. Then we could consider that area for restoration opportunities. Or you are a great botanist and have seen an area with rare plants that recently burned. If you again let us know, then we can consider that area for restoration opportunities. Now, the type of input that is less helpful to our study includes telling us if you're in favor or against the study, or for or against restoration in general, telling us that you only agree or disagree with BLM policy or previous NEPA decisions, as well as input that does not pertain to the study. We are accepting feedback on our map and corresponding GIS data. Any public input you'd like to submit is due September 16th. We will review and incorporate that public input into our restoration opportunities map as appropriate. We will create and finalize the restoration opportunity map at the end of September. The BLM Southern Nevada District Office may use this map to prioritize future restoration projects. Restoration projects will be analyzed for the appropriate environmental analysis at the time they are proposed. We anticipate that this is a dynamic map that will change when, for example, the desert tortoise habitat is updated. The restoration opportunity map will not be a BLM decision. Instead, it may serve as a decision support tool. If and when BLM changes our heat map, we may send out an email updating linking to updates linking to the updated GIS data and maps on our e-planning website. Ali will now start the question and answer period. Ali?
Forrest? Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and get into our question and answer period. For this, we will be using the Q&A icon. This feature is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So you may have to wiggle around your mouse or press on your phone screen to get that toolbar to pop up. Once you have that icon open, you can go ahead and type your question into the box and submit. Then a BLM specialist will either answer your question live or type an answer back to the entire audience. We will answer questions as quickly as possible. However, it may take us just a few minutes to gather our thoughts and provide a well thought out reply. And we will do our best to answer all questions received this evening. However, if we are unable to answer everyone's questions, we will go ahead and capture all of those unanswered questions and post those with the answers to the virtual public meeting website, along with the recording of this meeting. I also want to note that we'll spend about 30 minutes here or until we get through all of our questions, whichever comes first, before we go ahead and move on to our public input session. So we'll go ahead and give it a few minutes for folks to submit their questions. Again, that's just going to be into the Q&A box on your Zoom toolbar. So, thanks. All right, so our first question this evening is, how does this study fit in with BLM's mitigation program? And for the answer on that, we will go to JJ.
Okay, thanks, Ally. So good question. The BLM Southern Nevada District Office's restoration efforts are funded in part through what's called compensatory mitigation funding. So this is when a project proponent, for example, a solar energy developer, offsets adverse environmental impacts of a proposed action off-site. It's not possible on-site, so it's done off-site. And BLM wants to find the best places to implement this off-site mitigation, and the restoration opportunities map should help with that effort. Thanks.
All right, thanks for that answer, JJ. Our next question is, will the mapped restoration opportunities include recreation areas or proposed recreation areas? And for the answer on that, we'll go to Boris.
So this study will not remove any valid existing recreation uses. Trails are open for hiking, or routes that are open for motorized or mechanized vehicles will remain open. It is important to look for restoration opportunities within and adjacent to recreation areas. This study will consider restoration opportunities within and next to recreation areas. In these cases, the restoration efforts may not only enhance natural habitats, but also enhance the recreation experience by making a more scenic landscape in the long term. Future restoration projects in these areas would be evaluated for their ability to enhance the recreation experience by improving the scenic quality of the landscape, for example, as well as by enhancing wildlife habitat and other natural resource values.
Great, thanks, Boris. And I do just want to quickly remind folks to submit all of your questions to that Q&A feature, and we want to make sure that our chat box is reserved for any technical issues or any reasons not related to the Q&A today. So just make sure those go through the Q&A box and we will answer those accordingly. All right, and our next question is, are there available reports for the data that was collected for this project? How was the data collected? And for the answer on that, we will go to Laura.
Hey, this is JJ here. We're working on that. We have we'll just reply to that in the text. It's kind of a complicated question because it's going to be a little different for each of the resource layers. So the answer is yes. A lot of for some of these resources, and others maybe it was just internally collected observations or data, and there may not be an official report, but we'll let our ID team come up with an answer for that and respond.
Great, okay, thanks for that clarification, JJ. We are still waiting on some questions to come in through the Q&A, so we appreciate your patience with us as we gather our thoughts to answer those. All right, our next question is, you use the term valid recreation. What is the distinction? And for the answer on that, we'll go to Boris.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. The restoration projects that this map is identifying is really not meant to hinder any recreation opportunities or any existing recreation at this time or in the future.
Great, thanks, Boris. And again, just to remind folks that we are gathering information to provide answers to these questions that we are getting in through the Q&A. So we do appreciate your patience with us this evening. All right, our next question is, this project will most likely be used for analysis in the upcoming statewide resource management plan. How might this affect disposal designations? And for the answer on that, we'll go to JJ.
Yeah, thanks, Ali. Good question. Actually, we developed this idea and this project with not anticipating any use of it at all for any statewide resource management plan, or really any management plan at all. And we don't anticipate that it will affect any designations. It's really a local effort to try to look at areas that we can focus restoration outside of these disposal areas and outside of the land use planning that goes into creating things like the disposal area boundary, the SNPLMA boundary. So it's kind of a separate thing, and we don't anticipate that it'll affect those bigger land use planning topics at all.
All right, thank you for that. The rest of the questions that we've got this evening will be responded to with written answers. So if you do have any further questions, feel free to go ahead and throw those into the Q&A chat feature now. We can go ahead and answer those. We don't have any in the queue at the moment, so I'll go ahead and give it a few minutes for folks to throw in any of those last questions before we go ahead and move on to our comment session.
Okay, Ali, I'm just going to jump in here. We just to do a go back here and talk a little bit more about the earlier question about whether or not there are available reports for the data that was collected for this project. Our ID team is working on an answer there, and they got back to us. And basically, most of the data were already available internally. Some of the data, for example, sensitive plant locations and things like that are not available publicly, but the rest of it is. And we're going to put a link out here to one of the BLM geospatial GIS data sites that have a lot of that data that we used.
All right, yeah, thanks for that clarification on that. Go back. I believe Marcia will be sending out the link that JJ just talked about in the chat. Our next question is, how will this project affect future land use planning efforts? And we'll go back to JJ for the answer on that.
This is similar to the previous question. How will the project affect future land use planning efforts? And not at all is what we anticipate. We developed the project sort of outside of the land use planning process. This is simply more for where on the landscape would it be a good idea to do restoration in areas that have already been planned for other activities at a landscape level.
All right, great, thanks. So again, we don't have any questions in the queue right now. So again, just a few more minutes for folks to throw any of those last questions that they may have this evening into that Q&A icon before we go ahead and move on to our comment input session. All right, so our next question, I believe, is a follow-up to the previous question about future land use planning efforts. So this question is, does that mean future disposal and development will be able to occur on restoration lands? And we'll go back to JJ for the answer.
Yeah, so if by restoration lands, you mean areas of the heat map that show a potential restoration opportunity, the answer is yes. It is possible. Now, obviously, once we use this tool to help us sort of identify these areas, if there's an area that's already that the community, for example, has expressed interest in developing, we would be less interested in doing restoration there than elsewhere, where there's a higher chance of there not being some sort of conflicting project.
Alrighty, and again, just a few more minutes here for folks to go ahead and throw in their last questions before we move on to our public input session. All right, well, as we are not getting any more questions in this evening, we'll go ahead and move on to our public input session. So we'll go to the next slide. Perfect. So for the comment session today, we are going to ask folks to use that raise hand feature to indicate to us that you would like to provide a comment. We'll do our best to call on those who wish to provide a comment in the order that they raise their hands this evening. You can access the raise hand feature by clicking on the participants list icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. That's going to be right next to where the Q&A and chat box icons are as well. Let's see, the raise hand feature again will be located at the bottom of the participants list. You may need to toggle your mouse around, press on your phone screen, or exit out of your full screen Zoom view to see the icon. So once you've raised your hand, I'll go ahead and call on you and unmute you so that you may provide your input. We'll go ahead and first confirm that your audio is working. If it is not working, you may need to check your unmute button or respond to any pop-up messages that you're receiving about unmuting your computer. If you are having any further issues, you can always chat Chelsea for any technical support. So once we confirm that audio is working for both of us, I'll ask you to state your name, and also if you are representing an organization or group, please state that as well. We'll then go ahead and start a 2-minute timer. We do keep it limited to 2 minutes so that everyone here has time to speak this evening. After you have provided your comment, we'll go ahead and mute you and move on to our next speaker. If there is more time after the initial round of speakers, you may speak again. However, this will still be done in a 2-minute increments. And again, we'll go by that raise hand feature. So when providing your input tonight, please be respectful of others and refrain from using profanity. If you don't follow these guidelines, Chelsea will mute your microphone and we will move on to the next person this evening. If you don't feel that you are able to complete your verbal input today, we do encourage you to submit the remainder of your input in writing. All right, so we'll go ahead and move on to our next slide and begin the public input period. So if you are with us tonight and you would like to provide a comment or any input for the BLM to consider in this project, please go ahead and access that raise hand feature. And that way we will know that you are ready to provide your input. So I'll give folks a few minutes to go ahead and find that raise hand, and then we'll start calling on them. All right, folks, so I'm not seeing anyone raising their hand this evening to provide comment. Oh, Erica, it looks like you have raised your hand. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you from my end, and we'll confirm audio before you go ahead and state your name.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Hi. So I raised my hand when nobody else was gonna wait until the last minute. So I was wondering, why wouldn't your study be included in the statewide RMP? Because isn't that the purpose, is to get the local information and the most current available information so you can make the best plans possible? That's my question.
All right, thanks, Erica. This is actually the comment input session. We were in the question and answer session just a few minutes ago, and questions are going to be routed through that Q&A feature. If you want,
let me phrase that differently then. You should include your study, should be included in those, in the statewide RMP. I think that it's they're going to do the work and you're doing the work already. And I think that's double duty. Thank you.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Erica. I'm going to go ahead and put you back on mute, and we'll let anybody else this evening who would like to provide a comment. I'll give you a few minutes to go ahead and access that raise hand feature. All right, so again, I'm not seeing any more raised hands. So what I want to do here is go ahead and move on to our closeout slides, just so the BLM can give their closing remarks and any follow-up contact information. However, I do want everyone to know here that we will be here until 8 p.m. To provide any answers to questions. So if you do have any further questions, feel free to go ahead and put those in the Q&A box, and we will be providing written responses to those. We will also be accepting verbal input. So if you do find that you have a comment you would like to provide this evening, once Boris is done closing out the meeting, you can go ahead and raise your hand, and we will still be here to accept that verbal comment up until 8 p.m. So at this point, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Boris.
All right. Well, thanks for joining tonight, and thank you for your questions and input. Remember that you may submit written input to our website that's listed here. And if you have problems with the website input form, please email us at the email presented here. Public input is due September 16th of this year, just a little over 2 weeks. Thank you and good night.